The week begins with another player entering the Ukraine story, Saudi Arabia. Their foreign minister visited Kiev. We'll tell you why. Also, why so many leaders are heading to China. Zelensky wants to talk to Xi Jinping. Macron plans to travel to Beijing. And the Belarusian president, Lukashenko, will be in China tomorrow. It seems China is challenging the US in Ukraine, and America is hitting back with a new report on the origins of the pandemic. It is based on new intelligence, we're told. It says the virus leaked from a Chinese lab. Tonight we ask, even if the obvious Chinese role is conclusively proven with hard evidence, does the world really have a plan to punish China? Meanwhile, in Iran, schoolgirls are being poisoned. In America, a cartoon strip is being cancelled. And in the world of conflicting scientific research, intermittent fasting is now being linked to cancer. We'll tell you all about it. The headlines first. Nepal's government is in trouble. The ruling coalition is coming apart. Prime Minister Prachand faces a floor test in parliament. He's cancelled his first foreign visit to Qatar. Turkey will hold NATO membership talks with Sweden and Finland next month. These talks were postponed after the Quran burning incident in Stockholm. Turkey says it's still not in favour of Sweden's bid. Is a deal for Northern Ireland finally in sight? The UK and the EU are close to an agreement in this post-Brexit deadlock. It will end the dispute, which has been simmering since London left the European Union in 2020. Chinese billionaire Bao Fan is cooperating with authorities, says his company. This comes almost 2 weeks after the banking tycoon disappeared. It sparked fears of a crackdown on the financial services industry in China. And more than 50 migrants, including 11 children and a newborn baby, die after their overloaded boat sinks in the rough seas off southern Italy. The vessel broke apart while trying to land. The ship was carrying migrants from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, and Iran. We start tonight with another twist in the Ukraine story, the entry of Saudi Arabia. You heard it right. Saudi Arabia wants to play mediator, and they sent their foreign minister to Kiev. Now, on first impressions, it doesn't add up. Why is Saudi Arabia interested in Ukraine? What is their minister doing in Kiev? His name is Prince Faisal bin Farhan. He made a surprise visit to Ukraine, and he came bearing gifts. Gifts worth $410 million. So it's clear that Saudi Arabia is making an outreach to Ukraine. The question is why? Tonight on Vantage, we'll connect the dots to find the answer. You see, Saudi Arabia has a unique position in this conflict. It has cooperated with Russia, and it has shown support for Ukraine too. Now it wants a bigger role. But can Riyadh deliver where others failed? Every leader worth their salt has tried mediation in this battle. Major powers remain at odds on how to end the war. Ukraine and Russia refuse to come to the negotiating table. So what role can Riyadh play? Let's break this down and start with the visit. It was a surprise visit, just like Joe Biden's. It came out of the blue. This was the first time in 30 years that a senior Saudi leader has visited Ukraine. The foreign minister held a series of meetings. He met with President Volodymyr Zelensky. He also met Zelensky's chief of staff and Ukraine's foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba. They signed a range of agreements. Riyadh is giving aid worth $410 million to Ukraine, and the agreements dictate how this money will be spent, $410 million. A big chunk of this money will go towards oil grants. Basically, Saudi Arabia is financing oil products for Ukraine. Some $300 million will be spent towards this, to give oil products to Ukraine. Ukraine will be able to get oil from Saudi Arabia for free, up to $300 million. The Saudi foreign minister also had a message. He called for a peaceful end to the war.
The kingdom is also really eager to support everything that reduces tension and escalation in order to get to a peaceful solution to this war. And we in Saudi Arabia are convinced that any end to the war should be through discussions on a negotiation table in a framework of international law and through Charter of the United Nations to respect the sovereignty of the countries. This is why we will keep working with different parties to search for a chance of getting to such a settlement.
A negotiated truce and respect for the UN Charter, he says. Riyadh wants this war to end. Last week, the United Nations General Assembly voted on a resolution. It called on Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. Do you know which way Saudi Arabia voted? Riyadh backed the resolution. In other words, Saudi Arabia supported the call for Russia to leave Ukraine. and it explained its position in a press statement. I have it with me. Listen to what it says. Listen to what the last line says. The kingdom will continue to strive to mediate between the two parties in an effort to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict that will put an end to the ongoing bloodshed and suffering. So Saudi Arabia wants to mediate, but will others play ball? Also, why does Riyadh think it can succeed where others have failed? Because Riyadh has done it in the past and they were successful. This was in the month of September. Saudi Arabia was involved in a negotiation. It was a prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine. And Saudi Arabia was the mediator. And it succeeded. Almost 300 prisoners of war were released. This included 10 foreign nationals, the citizens of Morocco, the United States, the United Kingdom, Sweden, and Croatia, among others. Yesterday, Ukrainian officials underlined the role of Saudi Arabia.
I would also like to emphasize the active role of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in the mediation and negotiations on the humanitarian and social track. We are very grateful to Saudi Arabia for its assistance in the release of 10 foreign prisoners of war on September 21 last year. This mission of Saudi Arabia is an extremely important factor in our cooperation, and we agreed that we will continue to work in this direction.
Saudi Arabia is important. That is the takeaway from Kiev. What about Moscow? Where does Russia stand on potential Saudi mediation? Saudi Arabia and Russia have a strong relationship. The Saudis have helped Moscow. They haven't joined the Western sanctions against Russia. They've also refused to ban Russian oil supplies. Remember, Russia is a part of the oil cartel called OPEC+. OPEC, OPEC. It's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC+ is a group of 23 countries. They are the world's leading oil producers. They hold regular meetings. They decide how much oil they should sell, and hence they also dictate global oil prices. Last year, the West put a lot of pressure on Saudi Arabia. It wanted Russia to be removed from this group, OPEC+. But Saudi Arabia refused. In fact, Biden traveled all the way to Riyadh for this and returned empty-handed. So the Saudis have stood by Russia, and this relationship with both Russia and Ukraine makes the Saudis potential mediators. Saudi Arabia has influence and leverage, and it has a successful track record of mediation. So Riyadh's efforts must be taken seriously. It's another matter that Riyadh itself remains bogged in a war, the one in Yemen. The United Nations has appealed for $4.3 billion for the people of Yemen. It's often called the forgotten war. But for now, the Saudis want to put all their energies on ending the war in Ukraine. But what's in it for them? Why should Riyadh bother itself with this? Succeeding where world powers have failed would raise Riyadh's stature. From being declared a pariah a few years ago to making headlines as a potential peace broker is a lot of progress for Riyadh. And it doesn't hurt that the Americans have praised the visit. Saudi Arabia has a lot to gain in this game, and it's playing its cards well so far. But Saudi Arabia is not the only candidate for mediation. China, too, has thrown its hat in the ring. Last week, Beijing proposed a peace plan. The West promptly rejected it, but Zelensky had a different response. He wants to meet Xi Jinping to discuss it. And even India could have a say. New Delhi has been engaging in quiet diplomacy. India has nudged Russia to not use nukes, and the Americans have now put it on record.
I was engaged with my counterpart, Mr. Lavrov. Others were engaged with theirs. But we urged, and I think successfully, other countries that might have a little bit more influence with Russia these days, like China, but also other countries like India, to engage him directly about their absolute opposition to any use of nuclear weapons.
That was America's top diplomat describing how the mighty US needs help to tackle Russia. It's a pretty complex mess right now. No side wants to concede an inch. America's grandstanding has not achieved much, and Europe is still debating on how to proceed. So they've left it to Zelensky to decide when Ukraine will stop fighting and when it will start negotiating with Russia. Until then, the West will keep throwing money at the problem. They'll keep pumping more weapons into Ukraine. But can they trust Kiev beyond a point? Last month, Zelensky carried out a purge, and now he has fired Ukraine's top commander. No reason given. His name is Edward Moskalyov. He was the commander of Ukraine's joint forces. His men were fighting in the Donbass, and Moskalyov was in charge since March 2022, right after the war began. Now suddenly he's been fired. What happened? No one knows for sure. Zelensky spoke to him on Friday, and on Sunday he issued a decree, one-line statement that announced the dismissal. Remember, Ukrainian forces are already on the back foot in the Donbass. Russia has been focusing on the east, specifically in Bakhmut. The Russians say they've made gains, the Ukrainian says they've pushed back, and now suddenly their top commander is gone. This comes days after Zelensky fired at least 15 top officials. This included members of his inner circle. And these firings were on charges of corruption. The messaging and the timing could not have been worse. But the West is too invested in the war to pull out now. So they're sending more lethal arms. The much-awaited delivery of tanks began last week. Poland made the first deliveries. Long story short, instead of asking questions to Zelensky, the West is sending him arms and aid. And now he says he wants to talk to China. Zelensky wants to meet Xi Jinping to discuss his peace plan, the same plan that his Western partners dismissed. And here's something else that you must know. Since this war began, Xi Jinping has not spoken to Zelensky. Suddenly, he proposes a plan without consulting Ukraine, and Zelensky wants a summit with the Chinese president. Will Xi agree? No commitment from China yet.
China's position on the Ukrainian crisis is extremely clear and consistent. Our core interest is to promote peace talks and push for the political solution to the crisis. We have always maintained communication with all relevant parties, including Ukraine.
Maybe Zelensky could send a message through Macron. The French president is visiting China. He will travel to Beijing in April. Macron wants China to put pressure on Russia. He's looking for support on two fronts. Number one, stop Russia from deploying nukes. And number two, end the fighting as a precondition for talks. So expect Beijing to become central to the Ukraine story in the days and weeks ahead. In fact, tomorrow, China is hosting Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. Belarus shares a border with Russia and Ukraine, and Lukashenko is an important ally of Putin. He has allowed Russian forces to operate in Belarus, in his country, and launch attacks into Ukraine from his territory. Lukashenko is an important player in this game, so China wants to hear him out. Xi Jinping also has plans to visit Russia. So here's where things stand. Zelensky wants to talk to China. Macron wants to talk to China. Lukashenko is set to talk to China. Russia is already talking to China and seeking arms. And China is ready to play a big role, even propose peace. America doesn't like any of it. Their National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has issued fresh warnings.
We have, at this point, not seen them take the step of providing weapons to Russia for purposes of the war in Ukraine. We are watching closely. We know they haven't taken it off the table. And we are sending a clear message, as are our European allies, that this would be a real mistake because those weapons would be used to bombard cities and kill civilians, and China should want no part of that.
In that interview, Sullivan referred to the reports from last week. China apparently wants to supply 100 drones to Russia. We told you about this last week. Beijing has rejected these claims that it will supply these drones, but the US says the claims have merit. In fact, Washington has sanctioned some Chinese firms. On what grounds? The US claims they're helping Russia. They're helping Russia fuel this conflict. And that if China goes ahead and gives more weapons, the West will impose more sanctions. Honestly, it's a bit rich coming from the US. America, of all countries, cannot accuse others of fueling the conflict by giving weapons. And frankly, their threats don't really work. Just look at Russia. Since last year, over 10,000 individuals, more than 3,000 companies, and almost 500 institutions have been sanctioned. What is the result? The war hasn't stopped. The Russian president says the West is trying to break up his country.
In today's circumstances, when all the leading NATO countries have declared their main aim is to inflict a strategic defeat on us so that our people will suffer, as they say. They have a single aim, to break up the former Soviet Union and its main part, the Russian Federation. Then, maybe they will accept it into the so-called family of civilized nations, but only separately, you see, each part separately. For what purpose? To coddle those parts and put them under their control.
So how will the West respond to this? Russia is unrelenting in its offensive. China is challenging America and Ukraine, and Zelensky is keen to meet the Chinese president. 1 year into the war, the West is not winning on any front. And if today China were to attack Taiwan, the US wouldn't be able to defend it. This is not my assessment. This comes from the US military. America's top generals are worried. They say they are in no position to defend Taiwan. This is the finding of their study called The World After Taiwan's Fall. It is making waves in Washington. It has pointed out some alarming gaps in the US military. It says the US lacks long-range missiles. They'll be needed to protect American forces around Taiwan, but America doesn't seem to have enough of them. The report describes two quote-unquote nightmare scenarios. The first one, where there is no international intervention, and in the second one, the US and allies step up. They mount a military intervention. In both cases, Taiwan will lose. That's what the report predicts. Taiwan will lose whether or not the world fights for it. Let's take you through the specifics. The first scenario is obvious. China attacks Taiwan and the island is unable to defend itself against the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army. And this outcome is not hard to imagine. China has a bigger military force and they're well equipped. On the basis of sheer numbers, Taiwan's defense forces are no match. So they may not be able to defend themselves. But what about the US? Why is the US not ready to take on the PLA? Apparently, because of some alarming shortages, the US forces need long-range anti-ship missiles. They'll be used to take out Chinese warships in the event of an invasion, but America doesn't have enough of these missiles in its inventory. Recently, a senior US Navy commander briefed lawmakers. He shared details about the American stockpile. Let me quote from his statement. This is what he said. The current US inventory contains less than 250 of these missiles. Less than 250. How many do the US forces need? At least 1,000 to 1,200. So they don't even have half of what they will need. And they may not be able to get them quickly. The current rate of production is terribly slow. In 1 year, the US produces anywhere between 38 to 88 missiles. Again, these are long-range anti-ship missiles. At this rate, 38 to 88 in 1 year, it could take more than a decade for the stockpile to reach the optimum level. That is, if the US does not fight another war or use another missile to take out a spy balloon. Jokes aside, America will need much more than missiles. It will need bombers and fighter jets. And on both fronts, the US is falling behind. Again, their own assessment. To launch the anti-ship missiles, they will need B-1 bombers. Does the US Air Force have them? Again, they don't. Reports say they have quote-unquote poor readiness. They'll also need more aircraft carriers in the region. The US naval forces, with all of their resources, are still falling behind. What about the other side? What about the Chinese? Is China ready to invade Taiwan? Xi Jinping has his doubts. That's what the CIA chief William Burns believes. He has given an interview and this is what he said, I'm quoting, "I think our judgment at least is that President Xi and his military leadership have doubts today about whether they could accomplish that invasion. I think as they've looked at Putin's experience in Ukraine, that's probably reinforced some of those doubts." That's what the CIA chief says. What is the basis of these claims? Burns did not share any specifics. But he did say that China is serious about controlling Taiwan and that the threat should be taken seriously. It's not an overreaction. Last week, Beijing warned Washington. The PLA issued a statement. It said China will strive for peaceful reunification, but it will not hesitate in taking military action.
We have noticed there are often such contradictory remarks from the US side. I would like to stress that Taiwan is China's Taiwan. Resolving the Taiwan question is a matter of the Chinese, a matter that must be resolved by the Chinese, and no external interference will be tolerated. Whatever the US says, it cannot alter China's reunification process, nor will it shake our determination to safeguard national unity and territorial integrity.
Xi Jinping has asked his military to prepare. He wants the PLA to be ready by 2027. Will the Americans be prepared if China attacks? What if the PLA strikes Taiwan before 2027? Will the US intervene then? Washington cannot leave this to chance after all the promises they've made to Taipei. Their so-called strategic ambiguity is beginning to sound like an excuse for lack of strategy. Now to the latest challenges for Pakistan, the Taliban and Nikki Haley. I'll explain. Let's start with Nikki Haley. She is running for the White House and taking aim at Pakistan. Nikki Haley says if she is elected, she'll cut American aid to Pakistan. Why? Because Pakistan is quote-unquote in the pocket of China. The latest exhibit was seen just last week. Pakistan got another $700 million from its largest creditor, the Chinese. Not for the first time, and definitely not the last. But will this money end up in Afghanistan? I'll tell you why I asked this. Pakistan is struggling with the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban, another homegrown terror group, now challenging their grip on power. So Islamabad sought help from Kabul to clean the mess. Kabul says it will help if Pakistan is ready to pay. Our next report has more. Nikki Haley is running for president. Like any presidential contender, she's spelling out her policy. And Pakistan has reason to worry, courtesy its iron brother China. Because Nikki Haley says China is America's enemy number one.
The number one threat we have is China. Republicans and Democrats for too long thought that if we were nice to China, they'd want to be like us. That's narcissistic. They don't want to be like us. They want to be communists.
Haley wants to up the ante. She wants to cut American aid to countries like Pakistan, who she says are in China's pocket. I'm quoting what she said. Belarus is in the pocket of Russia, Zimbabwe in the pocket of China, Pakistan in the pocket of China. I will cut every cent in foreign aid to countries that hate us. A strong America doesn't pay off the bad guys. The pitch to cut American aid to Islamabad is not new. Haley's competitor and former President Donald Trump had suspended $1.3 billion in aid for Pakistan in 2018. The reason? Pakistan's track record of harboring terrorists on its soil. Republicans defended the decision, saying Pakistan killed American soldiers.
We were giving $1 billion in military aid to Pakistan, who was turning around harboring terrorists that were trying to kill our American soldiers. We don't give that $1 billion to Pakistan.
Over the past 2 decades, the US is said to have given over $32 billion in direct aid to Pakistan. Haley's latest remarks come at an interesting juncture. Less than a fortnight back, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari met China's top diplomat Wang Yi. This was at the Munich Security Conference. They were seen exchanging customary pleasantries, but the real agenda was clear. Islamabad needed funds from Beijing. Its economic crisis was worsening. Foreign exchange reserves dipped to under $4 billion. And China came to Pakistan's rescue again. Days after Bhutto's meeting, Beijing offered a fresh loan worth $700 million to Pakistan. This will add to Pakistan's huge pile of debt from China. As per the IMF, 30% of Pakistan's foreign debt is owed to China. That's roughly $30 billion. Also, Pakistan is aiming to refinance Chinese loans worth $2 billion. It's a glorious mess. Now add the Taliban to the mix. They want Pakistan to pay up. What for? Disarming terrorists. This story is about the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. They've gone on a rampage in Pakistan, storming police stations and killing security personnel. They're challenging Islamabad's grip on power. This group functions in Pakistan with the blessings of its masters in Afghanistan. So Pakistan took up the matter with Kabul. A high-level delegation led by Defense Minister Khwaja Asif went to Kabul last week. It presented the Afghan Taliban with quote-unquote irrefutable evidence of the TTP's involvement. And what was Kabul's response? It said the TTP does not have any basis in Afghanistan. Then they made an offer. Afghanistan will help disarm the TTP, but Pakistan will have to pay for it. It will have to bear the costs of disarming and relocating the fighters. How many of them? Around 12,000. Add their families and the number touches 30,000. Pakistan doesn't have the money to take care of its own people. Can it spend on rehabilitating terrorists? It's best to conclude with the words of India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. No country is ever going to come out of a difficult situation if its basic industry is terrorism. Now let's talk about the pandemic. It killed 6.8 million people the world over. But is it over yet? That question is still being debated. But if there were any doubts, still any doubts about how it began, they're clearing up one report at a time. Here's the latest one. It says the Wuhan virus came from a lab leak in China. This is the finding of the US Energy Department. It has been shared with the White House. And this conclusion, we are told, is based on new intelligence. And let me tell you this, why this is extremely important. Because the US Energy Department is part of the US intelligence community. This is a community of 18 agencies. And they have strict instructions from President Joe Biden. Their task is to find out where COVID-19 came from. The Energy Department has submitted its report. It's also significant because it has considerable scientific expertise. This department operates laboratories across the United States. Some of them even conduct advanced biological research. And this is not the first American agency to say that it was a lab leak. Do you know which other agency had the same conclusion? The Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI. The FBI has been talking about a lab leak since 2021, and now the Energy Department has said the same. Here's how U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan reacted to the news.
The reference to the Department of Energy, President Biden specifically requested that the national labs, which are part of the Department of Energy, be brought into this assessment because he wants to put every tool at use to be able to figure out what happened here. And if we gain any further insider information, we will share it with Congress and we will share it with the American people. But right now, there is not a definitive answer that has emerged from the intelligence community on this question.
That makes one thing pretty clear. The US government has given clear instructions to the intelligence community to find the origins of the pandemic. And one more report pointing at China makes for good optics. It gives weight to the lab leak theory. It puts China in a spot. But then again, China has been in a spot for a long time. Just like the world has learned to live with the virus, China has learned to live with the fact that many around the world blame it for the pandemic. 6.8 million people are dead. I'll keep repeating this number, 6.8 million, because someone needs to take responsibility for all these deaths. 2 American agencies say the virus came from a Chinese lab. What will the US do about it? Let's say more agencies conclude the same. Let's say we have conclusive proof that China was behind this. What will the world do about it? Does the world have a plan to make China pay? Because last we checked, the French president wanted to visit Xi Jinping to discuss his peace plan. It seems in the shifting priorities of geopolitics, the victims of this pandemic have already been forgotten. Also because punishing China would be a costly proposition, as costly as suffering at the hands of China. Beijing is not mincing words on how it will retaliate. Listen to this now.
We once again urge the United States not to politicize the whole issue. I would say scapegoating China cannot whitewash the US. If the United States persists in hyping up the lab leak theory, then they should set an example and invite the WHO to investigate the Fort Detrick and the University of North Carolina.
This statement is from 2021. The speaker was Fu Kong. He was the head of the Chinese Foreign Ministry's Arms Control Department then. Now he's China's ambassador to the European Union. China has scotched investigations into the origins of the virus. It has stonewalled all efforts of the World Health Organization, and so far the world has offered little beyond rhetoric. In the weeks and months ahead, we'll see more of it from America. They're gearing up for presidential elections next year, and China will feel the heat because no American leader today can afford to appear soft on China. Vivek Ramaswamy is in the race for the White House. He's the second Indian American to join the fray. It's a very long shot, but he too is promising to punish China.
I'm committing to deliver accountability for the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. Anything else is not an option, or we can expect even worse from the CCP in the future. And you mark my words, I think we need to use every financial lever in our arsenal to do it. As your president, I commit to doing that, including, but not limited to, even looking at the national debt of the U.S. that they hold as an option.
Then we have Nikki Haley. the other Indian American in the race. She says she will ensure that not even a cent is paid to the enemies of the United States in aid, enemies like China and Pakistan. So grand promises and hard-hitting reports on the lab leak. But don't expect any action against China just yet. Now to Iran. A new enemy has been identified in Iran. Girls going to school. Girls receiving an education. Schoolgirls are being seen as a threat. And do you know what's being done to neutralize this threat? The girls are being poisoned. If you thought the crackdown on anti-hijab protesters was horrid, this is a new low. Girls going to school are being poisoned. By whom? Iran's regime won't identify them, but critics say it's a pretty easy guess. Our next report has more.
Qom is considered a holy city in Iran. Now, it's also known as a city where schoolgirls are being poisoned. Their crime, they go to school. Schoolgirls are being poisoned since November last year. Now the news is spreading. On February 14th, several parents whose children had been poisoned gathered outside the Qom city governorate. They wanted an explanation from authorities about why their daughters were repeatedly falling ill. On Sunday, Iran's regime finally decided to speak. Iran's deputy health minister said this. After the poisoning of several students in Qom schools, it was found that some people wanted all schools, especially girls' schools, to be closed. So some people, whom Iran's government won't name, are poisoning schoolgirls. And they're doing this to scare girls away from school, to make sure that schools for girls are closed down. And what is Iran's regime doing about it? Let alone punishing the culprits, it isn't even willing to name them. Since November last year, hundreds of girls have fallen ill. Some struggled to breathe, others required medical intervention. The students reported a strange smell before they fell ill. The events have alarmed parents. They are now too afraid to send their kids to school. Schools in Qom have reported a drop in the number of students coming for classes. Reports say some schools have been unofficially closed. One teacher said, of the 250 students in our school, only 50 attended classes. Schools are supposed to be safe spaces for children, not in Iran. Especially not if you're a girl. Iran's regime isn't willing to name those behind the poisoning of girls, but Iranian journalists and activists believe extremist groups who are fundamentally opposed to women being educated are responsible. Iran was one of the first countries in West Asia to allow women to obtain university-level education. But a lot has changed since. Today, women's education is seen as a threat to political power. 2005 was the year when young girls really started seeing the tide turn against them. This was when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad became president. Before he became president, women accounted for more applications to universities than men in Iran. But by the end of his tenure in 2013, gender segregation in schools became common practice. Women weren't allowed to study all the subjects. Now, President Ibrahim Raisi's tenure is proving to be worse. Since September last year, there have been widespread protests in Iran. What's remarkable is that they've been led by women. Iranian law mandates that women cover their heads with a headscarf or a hijab in public places. Those who don't fall prey to the country's morality police. Women are challenging this. The Islamic regime is cracking down hard. More than 500 people have been killed. The anti-hijab movement is Iran's longest-running protest after the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And going by how women continue to be treated in Iran, these protests won't die down anytime soon.
Our next story is about comic strips. And it demands seriousness because, like any artist, comedians can influence our thoughts. But what happens when their humor stops being funny or takes a dangerous turn? Specifically, what happens when a cartoonist is being racist? This is what happens. Dilbert is being banished from the regular cubicle in the papers. Dilbert is a widely syndicated comic strip that mocks office culture. Hundreds of newspapers across the US have dropped it, And this time, Dilbert can blame his misery on the creator, Scott Adams. But why is this happening? Because Adams went on a racist rant during his YouTube live stream. He called black people a hate group. He also said, and I'm quoting, white people should just get away from them. All this in a response to a questionably designed poll, a poll which asked if it's okay to be white. Now, this phrase is often linked to the white supremacist movement. Just over half of black Americans responded with agreement.
If nearly half of all blacks are not okay with white people, according to this poll, not according to me, according to this poll, that's a hate group. That's a hate group. And I don't want to have anything to do with them. And I would say, based on the current way things are going, the best advice I would give to white people is to get the hell away from black people.
This live stream has destroyed the comic strip. After 3 decades in syndication, Adams is being widely rebuked by newspapers, the same papers that had published his work. The long list includes the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. A big blow came from USA Today Network. It publishes over 300 papers. They call the comments discriminatory. Others called Adams's comments, quote-unquote, hateful and racist. And when referring to dropping the comic because of his comments, a publication said, and I'm quoting, "It was not a difficult decision to make." But Adams has defended himself. He says he's being wrongly cancelled. Listen to this.
There's almost no change you can make in the world that doesn't have a racial or racist overtone. So I would say this for sure. Whether you're black or white, when you're managing your own career, you should be as racist as you need to be to get the advantage.
His defense, if it can even be called that, has softened the hearts of some, including the flag bearer of free speech, Elon Musk. The Twitter CEO has accused the media of being racist against whites. This has also ignited a debate on social media. While some see calls for accountability, others see censorship. In other words, cancel culture. Cancelling brands or individuals refers to ostracizing or shunning them. It happens if they've done or said something offensive. This word has made it to the socio-political discourse, but the media is not having any of it, so much so that a major national newspaper editor has responded. He said this is not a cancel culture decision and that their paper is not a home for those who espouse racism. An editor in Texas also said, dropping a comic strip is not censorship. And I'm quoting, "Though Adams is entitled to his opinion, the paper is not obliged to give him a platform and financial support." And this is affecting Adams financially. He said most of his income will be gone. More than that, he said his reputation is destroyed for the rest of his life. Regardless, he remains defiant. He says those who don't see the full context are in a quote-unquote fake news bubble. But many have been seeing the comedian's context for a while. His plot lines featured hurtful themes more recently. Last year, Adams introduced the first ever black character to Dilbert. He used the character to mock workplace diversity and transgender identity. And some of this goes back a decade. He has celebrated men's rights activism. He compared women seeking equal pay to children begging for candy. He even promoted conspiracy theories and attacks on Black Lives Matter. Newspapers have previously dropped Dilbert, but it was nothing like the scale of what happened last week. The media is responsible for shaping minds and the society by extension. What happens in the papers is comic section, and how it influences the real world is no joke. What do you do when your country is on the verge of collapse, when you have no hope left for your motherland? Many leave in search of a better life for themselves and their children. For many of them, the West shines as a beacon of hope. They risk everything to get to European shores, and often they lose everything in the process. A boat carrying migrants has capsized off the coast of southern Italy. Dozens died as the rough seas tore their ramshackle boat apart. The migrants were from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and Somalia. So desperate were they to leave their crumbling nations that they decided to brave one of the world's most dangerous migration routes. Our next report brings you the details.
Before the break of dawn on Sunday, the southern Italian town of Crotone awoke to a tragedy. Dead bodies had started washing ashore. A ship had capsized off the Italian coast. The ship may be too generous a way to describe the dinghy. It was a wooden boat, too small and fragile to survive the rocks near Crotone. The boat was ferrying about 170 migrants. It carried families, including young children. The migrants were from countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and Somalia. Countries ravaged by war, plagued by economic crises, bereft of opportunities. These people left their homes looking for a better life. They boarded the questionable boat in Turkey. They were promised a better life if they set sail for Europe. Instead, for many, the boat brought death. After the boat capsized, Italian rescue workers were at the beach for hours. They worked frantically to try and rescue any migrants that washed ashore. The rough seas and crashing waves hampered rescue efforts. By the time the sun set, almost 60 people were confirmed dead. None of the children who had undertaken the journey survived. A 1-year-old was among the dead. Around 30 people were still missing. The death toll is likely to rise.
È una giornata di lutto per la Calabria.
It is a day of grief for Calabria. This is a struggle that falls into a general indifference. Calabria is a region that welcomes people. Last year, we welcomed 18,000 migrants, but we can't be abandoned by Europe. This type of tragedy should have been avoided the day before and not lived how we are living it today and how we will live it tomorrow.
Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed sorrow at the deaths. She blamed human traffickers for the disaster, people who charge a fee to smuggle the desperate migrants into Europe. They were involved in this accident as well.
During the operations, an alleged smuggler was also identified, together with the Carabinieri patrol, and investigations are currently underway to ascertain responsibility for 3 other alleged smugglers, also of Turkish nationality, who are currently on the run, and the search is ongoing.
Every year, thousands cross the torrid Mediterranean Sea to seek greener pastures in Europe, and every year, hundreds die. It's considered one of the world's most dangerous migration routes. 20,000 people have died or gone missing at sea in the central Mediterranean since 2014. UN estimates say the Mediterranean has claimed more than 220 this year alone. Yet despite the obvious dangers, people continue to try and cross into Europe. Even though Europe is reeling from the war in Ukraine, it's still preferable for the migrants compared to their battered home nations. Migrants try and land in southern Europe and then make their way up. Northern Europe offers them refuge and a chance at a better life. And can you blame them? Their choice is often between dying at sea or dying at the hands of their brutal, ineffectual government. At least with migration, they're given a small glimmer of hope.
And finally, Monday blues and hangry moods are best friends. Hangry refers to a potent combination of being hungry and angry. If you missed breakfast today in a rush to reach work, you probably know what I'm talking about. Our last story tonight is about skipping meals. And this one may simply make you angry. Skipping meals or intermittent fasting is all the rage these days. A lot of people swear by the concept. I'm sure intermittent fasting has its benefits. But according to a new study, it may also be linked to cancer. This is a recent study by a school of medicine in New York. It says intermittent fasting could increase the risk of cancer. It may also result in higher chances of cardiovascular diseases. Now, first things first, what is intermittent fasting? It involves switching between days of fasting and days of eating normally. It can be done in several ways. One such type of fasting is time restricted. It's fairly common among those who are trying to manage their weight. It narrows the eating time to 6 to 8 hours. When someone does eat, they opt for healthy options like fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Also drink water and unsweetened beverages. Sounds like something that will help in bodily function, but researchers say otherwise. They carried out a study on mice. They fed these mice at different intervals, sometimes restricted their intake of food, and then drew their blood at different time periods for analysis. Their white blood cell count fell by up to 90%. Now, white blood cells are the cells that help fight diseases. They control inflammation, they eliminate damaged cells from the body. So what does the study show? That skipping meals can trigger a response in the brain, and this negatively affects immune cells. In other words, fasting, according to this study, is bad for your immune system. It doesn't matter if fasting is for a few hours or for 24 hours, it can make it difficult for the body to fight off infection. This has led to a better understanding of how chronic fasting may affect the body. Now, we understand this may come as a shock. For as long as we can remember, people have had fasts for religious reasons, across cultures, across religious philosophies, including Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Taoism, Hinduism. Various religions believe in fasting, in the concept of fasting. Others have done it for specific health benefits. Intermittent fasting has been one of the hottest diet trends for more than a decade. There are millions of social media posts about it. Study after study has hailed the benefits of dieting and fasting. In the past, they've said that fasting promotes blood sugar control. It improves blood pressure and helps with weight loss. How does that happen? Fasting makes our bodies go through several changes. It adjusts to the lack of food. There are decreased insulin levels, increased fat burning, decreased inflammation, and changes in hormone levels. From our grandmothers to the Kardashians, a wide range of people have promoted fasting. But this new study says otherwise. It has delved into the fundamental biology of fasting, and it hits the breakfast skippers the hardest. There is a cost to fasting that carries health risks. The nervous and immune systems constantly communicate with each other, and depriving ourselves of certain nutrition can harm the cells. This is what the new study says. Scientists have also found that along with the heart, fasting affects the brain. It elicits a stress response. So feeling hangry is not a pop culture phenomenon. Skipping meals actually makes you angrier. But it's one study against the other. And we must underline the fact that this latest study is still at a theoretical stage. So further research is necessary to expand the findings. But for now, we leave you with a quote. To eat is a necessity, they say, but to eat intelligently is an art. And finally, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with India, the South Korean ambassador and embassy staff danced to Natu Natu, the Golden Globe-winning song. Prime Minister Modi called the performance lively and adorable. In Israel, tens of thousands of people protested in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial reforms. In Turkey, it rained stuffed toys during a match in Istanbul. These toys will be donated to earthquake survivors. In Kyrgyzstan, people played a traditional sport which possibly dates back to the days of Genghis Khan. In Russia, a giant bonfire was lit to mark the end of winter season, and in Sydney, Anthony Albanese participated in a pride parade, becoming the first Australian Prime Minister to do so. We're leaving you with these. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Duygusal anlar, tarihi görüntüler. Olağanüstü görüntüler. Depremzede çocuklarımızın yüzlerini bir nebze olsun güldürebilmek için. Hiya!
Of course, accusing the Congress party of being a false Hindutva agenda party, but more importantly, how opportunistic it is. It decides that it wants to project itself as a party which believes in the freedom movement, has a freedom movement legacy, but is also selective in choosing its legacy.
Right, Pallavi, as you rightly mentioned that the damage has already been done. Ghulam Nabi Azad has tweeted saying that after his exit, Congress, the BJPization of Congress has started. Can you tell us more about this?
I was just mentioning that also a short while back. Ghulam Nabi Azad, as we know, quit the party, and he's accused the party of many things when he quit the party. He accused it of, kind of false narratives, how it is completely not in sync, and how it just chases the BJP's agenda rather than having its own agenda. And that's exactly what he said. And he said that, that the absence of Maulana Azad just goes on to show that the Congress no longer wants to associate itself with, the Muslim legacy. And this is something which is essentially wrong with the party.
All right, Pallavi, please stay with us. We have BJP's Tom Vadakan joining us on this story. Sir, good morning. So, sir, Congress did not include the picture of Maulana Azad in an advertisement of its plenary session. How do you see this?
Well, the normal procedure is that the artwork or the design is both shown to Rahul Gandhi and Mrs. Gandhi before it is cleared. No advertisement of the Indian National Congress is cleared unless these artworks are shown to the president, the current Congress president, Sonia ji and Rahul ji. Now, if they have seen it, this is not a slip. This is a deliberate attempt to. You garner the votes during the election time, and you ignore Muslim leaders. It's unfortunate that a party that claims to be part of the freedom struggle has ignored leaders of that stature. It's unfortunate indeed.
But sir, now senior Congress leader Jairam Ramesh has clarified that it was a slip-up and responsibility for it is being fixed and action will also be taken.
Some scapegoat may be found internally, but then the fact remains Jairam Ramesh cannot deny the fact that it has gone through a lot of filters before it came into publication. And if that is a slip, well, this kind of slips have been occurring too often in the Congress party, and that is why the Congress party has slipped.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Our top story, the capital has become a battlefield, ladies and gentlemen, after the arrest of Delhi Deputy Chief Minister Manish Sisodia by the CBI in the Liquorgate investigation. The number 2 leader in the Aam Aadmi Party has been sent to CBI custody for 5 days till March 4th. He has been accused of taking bribes, falsifying accounts, destruction of evidence and criminal conspiracy. In court, the CBI argued that Manish Sisodia generated illegal profits through the liquor policy in a secret conspiracy with top liquor barons in the city. The CBI has argued that custodial interrogation is essential for a proper probe, and the Deputy Chief Minister of Delhi has been evasive in his replies. Sisodia argued in court that the liquor policy was cleared by the LG of Delhi in 2021, adding that he has replied to all summons and there is no legal ground for custodial interrogation, as silence is not the same as non-cooperation. He also argued that the CBI has all of his devices and he has nothing to hide. Aam Aadmi Party workers hit the streets in protests across the country, accusing the BJP of political vendetta, calling the charges completely false. However, the party has much to answer, as no court has dismissed the case so far. In fact, with Manish Sisodia, 9 suspects have been arrested in connection to this case.
Liquorgate scam accused number 1. Delhi Deputy Chief Minister Manish Sisodia appearing in court a day after he was arrested by the CBI. After a heated 2-hour-long hearing in which the CBI argued that Sisodia had been evasive during questioning, the court granted the agency 5 days custody. Sisodia will remain in CBI custody till the 4th of March now. While Sisodia was in court, chaos erupted in the capital. Workers of the ruling Aam Aadmi Party gathered in large numbers at the party's headquarters. Some even sported handcuffs, claiming that fake cases were being filed against AAP leaders every day without any proof. They tried to march towards BJP's office, but came face to face with dozens of Rapid Action Force personnel and police who were deployed near AAP's office. Some AAP workers tried to breach police barricades and were promptly detained and dragged into buses.
Adequate presence of police personnel, in fact the Rapid Action Force, CISF and CRP as well. And as of now, this is the situation where from both the sides, RAF is pushing these protesters back, while these protesters are also pushing these personnel. And as of now, the situation is in control.
It wasn't just in Delhi. AAP workers held a pan-India dharna against Sisodia's arrest.